want, no, what we need is fiscal and policy space. Fiscal and policy space to achieve sustainable development, to be nimble, to adapt, and to innovate in ways that allow us to be true and faithful to the task of bringing prosperity to our people.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. When a Caribbean Prime Minister stands on the world stage and starts talking about injustice, inequality, and the struggles of the small island nations, people listen. But when it's Mia Mottley, it hits very different, because in this speech, she doesn't just speak for Barbados, she speaks for the entire Caribbean. So it's a very powerful speech. Watch it until the end, then I will come back with my comments.
Other major challenges. That's why I ask all the time, who sees us and who hears us? We continue to be confronted by problems of blacklisting, which pale into insignificance when compared to climate change, but which destroy our financial sector. The illicit flow of weapons, such that the ease with which people can go into public spaces and shoot and kill others is now regarded as just another item on the news, because we promote profit in the manufacture and trade of guns and weapons, of non-communicable diseases that strike down our people in the most insidious of ways, because we allow diets that promote the prosperity of a few multinational corporations to become the norm of the day with the food that we eat and the lives that we live. And in the case within our own community, Belize and Guyana continue to face challenges to their territorial integrity. I suppose people feel that because we have talked so long about Belize and Guyana and Cuba, that we can continue to talk about climate change and these other things, and that it is okay for it to be another tick on a UN General Assembly speech. These are all threats to our stability, to the people's stability in our lands. But you know, since last we met, there are other instances and circumstances, not of our making, that may yet destabilize us. And we say it over and over, but we ask, who is listening? And you know, we don't come with tales of woe only. The Caribbean has produced excellence. It really has. Nobel laureates, sportsmen who have excelled and are the best in the world of their type, artists, the best in the world of their type, leaders who have inspired previous generations and current generations. We don't come here as a proud people asking for handouts. We don't want and will not be mendicant. What we want, no, what we need is fiscal and policy space. Fiscal and policy space to achieve sustainable development, to be nimble, to adapt, and to innovate in ways that allow us to be true and faithful to the task of bringing prosperity to our people, or as in the theme of this General Assembly, to eradicate poverty, to educate our people, to include all such that there's not some outside and some inside. We want an international order equally that recognizes that there must be different policy prescriptions to suit the circumstances that we all have. And we can still be friends, small and large, north and south, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, all different races, all genders. An equitable and just international order that is truly built on the principles of justice and fairness for all and not just for some. A United Nations that recognizes that as 74 years old, we must be able to have difficult conversations as mature people and solve them. Many in the developing world were persuaded or required to abandon policies that were designed for the majority of our population to be transformed. And those policies were fashioned to adopt a consensus that was settled in Washington, D.C. and named thereafter. And that ultimately, regrettably, was about the consolidation of wealth in the hands of a very few. That's why we have seen the growing inequality that we have seen in the world over the last few decades. That is why too many people over the world have become cynical about governments and about the benefits that they can bring to them. The fueling of the greed of a few threatens to undermine what little gains we have made since independence. And we judge ourselves harshly because independence is a recent phenomenon for us. Others who have taken 150 years to get where they have gotten are still stumbling and falling. And you want to judge those who have had less than 50 or 60 years to operate in a world that has not been made in their image and that does not reflect their interests. This is the fate, my friends, of simply too many. And Mr. President, despite our small sizes, the 14 countries of the Caribbean community have been able to play leadership roles of international import. I can't stand here today without talking about St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that has become the smallest nation of the world ever to be elected to the Security Council to sit on it. We are proud of them. In addition, and I want to speak to this, because when CARICOM was confronted with the unfolding situation in Venezuela, I accompanied the then chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, to meet in this building with the UN Secretary General in January of this year. And we met with many delegations, and some said we were wasting our time, and some said the time for talk was already over. And we said then, as we say almost 9 months later, the time for dialogue, the time for talk, my friends, can never be over in a world that wants peace and prosperity. We don't take sides, but what we know is that you cannot propel war over dialogue. The people of Venezuela must be allowed to decide their own future in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter. Principles of non-intervention, non-interference, prohibition of the threat or use of force, respect for the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. It is regrettable that other multilateral organizations have not followed their own charters. And that is what makes the actions of our Secretary General of the UN more laudable, for refusing to breach his own charter and take actions even though member states have hurled into the recognition of those unelected. Our Caribbean Sea must remain a zone of peace, and for that we shall fight. Mr. President, I speak plainly and without fear, because from independence, Barbados' foreign policy has been premised on the simple principle of friends of all, satellites of none. Barbados, therefore, has always remained and will remain proud to have Cuba as a treasured friend.
Welcome back, guys. When I watched this speech, I understood why so many people across the Caribbean and even globally feel like Mia Mottley speaks for them. Because what she's talking about here is bigger than Barbados, it's bigger than Jamaica. It's really about the position of the Caribbean in the global system. And I want to break down some of the key things that she said and why they actually matter. So first, she talks about something that doesn't get enough attention: financial blacklisting. What she's referring to is how Caribbean countries have repeatedly been placed on international financial watch lists, especially by organizations like Financial Action Task Force and the EU, over concerns about money laundering or tax transparency. Now here's the issue. Many Caribbean economies rely heavily on offshore financial services. In some countries, it's a major pillar of the GDP. So when banks in Europe or North America decide Caribbean jurisdiction is high risk, they often cut off corresponding banking relationship. And when that happens, it becomes harder for the Caribbean businesses to process international payments, receive investments, or even send remittances. So when Mia Mottley says blacklisting is destroying the financial sector, that's not exaggeration. There have been documented cases where Caribbean banks lost access to global payment systems, which directly impacts ordinary people and businesses. So her point here is actually factual. Small states get penalized in global finance in ways that large countries rarely do. Then she moves to climate change. And honestly, this is one area where Mia Mottley has become one of the most recognized global voices, because the Caribbean contributes less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And yet it's among the most climate vulnerable regions on Earth. So things like stronger hurricanes, coastal erosions, rising sea levels that threaten tourism infrastructure. And for island economies, tourism is everything. So when she connects climate change to economic survival, she's not being dramatic. She's describing a structural reality. So that's actually why Barbados launched the Bridgeton Initiative, a global proposal to reform climate financing so vulnerable countries can access affordable funding after a disaster. Again, what she's saying here is grounded in policy reality and not rhetoric. Another point she raises is the illicit flow of weapons. The Caribbean does not manufacture firearms at scale, yet gun violence rates in several Caribbean countries are among the highest in the world. I did some research and found out that many illegal guns in the Caribbean originate from North America, particularly the United States, and are trafficked through the maritime routes. And the important part is small states usually lack resources to police maritime borders effectively. So again, her argument is structural, not blaming citizens, but pointing to the global supply chains of crime. Then she talks about non-communicable disease. And this might sound like a health issue, but it's also economic and political. The Caribbean has some of the highest rates of diabetes, hypertension, and obesity globally. And a major factor is the nutrition transition, the shift from traditional diets to processed foods. She also talks about global inequality, wealth consolidation in a few hands. Globally, wealth concentration has really increased. A small percentage of the world's population controls a disproportionate share of assets. Now, one thing I noticed in her tone is that she frames the Caribbean as historically excellent. And that's interesting because the Caribbean has produced disproportionate global cultural influence relative to its size. music, literature, and athletics, among others. So when she talks about Caribbean excellence, she is not just appealing to pride. She is referencing documented cultural impact. What makes Mia Mottley stand out is that she connects multiple issues into one narrative: finance, climate, security, health, inequality, and she frames them as interconnected challenges facing small island developing states. Another thing I noticed is her emphasis on dignity. She repeatedly suggests Caribbean nations don't want charity. They want fair opportunities. So when she says that the Caribbean demands space and not handouts, she's articulating economic sovereignty. And honestly, that's probably why many people across the region resonate with her, because she is articulating frustrations that exist in many small states. Things like limited bargaining power, exposure to global shocks, dependence on external markets, climate vulnerability, financial exclusion risks. These are structural conditions, not just governance issues. Regardless of political opinions, the factual basis of what she's describing is strong. And that's why she's gained recognition beyond Barbados. So, watching this speech, I can understand why people see her as the bold regional voice. Not because she's attacking anyone specifically, but because she is articulating challenges small Caribbean nations face in a global order that often overlook them. Please let me know what you think in the comment section. Also, subscribe, comment, like, share, and thank you for always supporting me. I will see you in the next video.